I'd like to thank Altus as a sponsor for these Candid Conversations, the ongoing conversations. We do these every month. We're really excited about these groups that we do, and we're looking forward to bringing you a lot of great speakers. We'd like to thank Veolia and West America for organizing today's event with us. Veolia will also have a panel discussing this topic of, among others, in terms of the municipal world, at our upcoming conference in November. That conference is happening November 16th, 17th, and 18th. It's live now. You can go to our website and see that program that'll show you with this, that panel and a bunch of other great panels that we put together. And we're really excited with what we've got planned for the conferences here. And we look forward to hopefully having all of you there for that great event. So with that, I would just like to give a bit of a brief rundown of what we're doing here today. We're discussing trends in the water and wastewater sector. We plan, as Canada plans to proceed with historic investments in infrastructure and water and wastewater projects. These are going to be key components of government infrastructure plans. There's a wide range of issues in this sector that could be addressed. We only have an hour today, so our initial focus will be on the continuing outsourcing of water and wastewater operations and alternate project delivery models for projects in building resilience within the water sector. We'll also discuss the pandemic, effect of the pandemic on the sector as well. So we're really excited for that. I'd like to introduce today's speakers. We have Joe Tackett, who's Senior Vice President, Municipal and Commercial Business with Veolia North America, Rhonda Harris, who's Owner's Advisor at Brown and Caldwell, and Robert Haller, Executive Director of the Canadian Water and Wastewater Association. With that, I'll just turn things over briefly to our speakers. We have a lot of great speakers today and a lot to cover, so we will move quickly through these topics, and I will be vigorous on making sure that we are staying on time. I'll just give our speakers a brief moment to introduce themselves and their background in this sector. So we'll start with you, Rhonda.
Thanks, Andrew. I appreciate that. Again, Rhonda Harris. I about 45 years in the industry, and the last 15 or so focused on O&M in the design, build, and collaborative delivery sector for water and wastewater.
Excellent. Robert?
Yeah, hi, Robert Haller. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Water and Wastewater Association, your national voice for water in Canada. We represent all the municipal utilities that do water, wastewater, stormwater from coast to coast to coast.
Excellent, thank you. And Joe?
Hi, my name is Joe Tackett. I'm the Senior Vice President of Veolia for North America. I've worked in the business for roughly 28 years on the non-regulated side of the business, the regulated side of the business, and also on the Department of Defense side.
Excellent. Perfect. So what we'll do is we'll just get started with some questions. We're moderating a little bit differently. The thing with Candid Conversations is we don't really have a set format. We just sort of use a format that works for us as pertains to the topic. So I'll just start off with the first question, which is, obviously top of mind for this panel, is the outsourcing or contracting of operations. It's well known that Canada's vast network of water distribution and wastewater collection systems are in need of major improvements and upgrades. There's increasing costs, municipalities starting to feel overwhelmed. Where and how can contract operators preserve and improve water and wastewater infrastructure, delivering these essential services? Let's lead off with you, Robert.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so I'll speak from that municipal side, and I represent those utilities. And I'm coming to this job after 20 years as a municipal manager. At no time is this privatization. That word creeps in a lot when we're discussing contracting services. This is an ownership issue. Ownership must stay public. It always will be public. This is the most important service that's provided. Now, I won't say arguably the most important. There's no argument. This is the most important water, wastewater, And really what we're doing is determining service delivery model. We get to set the service levels as a municipal council. The regulations are the same, no matter who's doing it. And the council or the water board still has control of the pricing and deals with affordability issues. So this may be a union issue, but it's not an ownership issue. It's a service delivery decision. As a municipal manager, I had to make decisions on snow plowing. Would we own our own fleet of trucks and drivers, or would I contract out? Same with grass cutting, arena operations, water and wastewater, no different. It's critical life support system, so you don't just ignore it. There's a lot of involvement and responsibility maintained by the council, but it's just a service delivery model. There's benefits to in-house, that you have staffing, control, knowledge. They're part of the community. There's flexibility. That flexibility might be dangerous. Whereas benefits to contracting are, the pricing's usually truer to costs. That there's an arm's length of the political process and less interference in what's going on. You can't make arbitrary budget cuts, or the gambling that I talk about, that they must follow maintenance schedules. They've been hired, contracted to maintain and do these steps, and there can't be a budget cut or a decision to shift money around politically. It's run more like a business, and I know I'll be the first to argue that municipalities are not a business, but sometimes we can try a little better at running things a little more like a business. But there's lots of models out there, from setting up your own corporate water board that's separated from council and establishing all of this on your own water rates, and that they're owned by the municipality. This expanded in Edmonton to EPCOR, which not only is a separate corporation with one shareholder, the city of Edmonton, but now they service many communities around Alberta, Saskatchewan, Arizona, New Mexico. I've worked a lot with the Ontario Clean Water Agency, which was a provincial agency, which we've contracted to do the operations. And then there are situations where we've worked with Veolia and others on contracting out, such as Regina, where the community went to a plebiscite on this issue of privatization and controls, and they went in favor of a partnership where the city joined with Veolia. So there's a lot of benefits to be seen in this contracting scenario.
Thanks for that. I'll turn it over to Joe and Rhonda just to sort of follow up on their thoughts.
No, this is Joe. I agree with what Robert said. I think that, and we see it, from California to the Virgin Islands. It becomes problematic because the municipalities caught between a rock and a hard place in terms of rate increases, how to gain new industry coming in, how to not take the funds and spend it inappropriately on infrastructure. So I think whether it be Veolia or another partnership, I'll say the third P there, that comes in and has those candid conversations, if you will, with that municipality, with city council, with the mayor, with the water sewer board. Those offerships that can brought to the table around that is the buying power from a large company that can come in, lower their rates, lower, I don't say the consumer's rates, but lower the total overall cost of doing business at that water wastewater facility. And you mentioned about treating it as a business. It's a good way to put it, because if you don't, and those costs continue to increase and the rates continue to climb with it, there's no money for infrastructure there. But if you can lower the cost or keep the cost even, and you take that increases that are slow and steady, and you park that back for infrastructure down the road, and you have a 10, 20-year plan behind that, that's where you really want to be. And I'll go on to say, you know, some municipalities have a 100-year life cycle for the investment that they make on infrastructure, whether it be water or wastewater. And it could be pipes, it could be plant, it could be anything. And you look at what the government's doing, they're parking it in at a 50-year life cycle for that pipe in the ground. And what they're doing is maintaining or lowering their cost of maintenance, emergency maintenance around the stuff. Yes, the rates start to climb and start to increase, but if you look at it from an investment standpoint, it makes sense.
If I can add a couple of things to that. I don't disagree with you, Joe. I do think there's more issues involved, and particularly the staffing. As you know, all organizations are in a really severe area today now where staffing is becoming more and more critical. Both not just because of the pandemic, because of the generational cycle of staffing. A lot of institutional knowledge is retiring in the industry. So sometimes you can have a contractor like Veolia or Jacobs or Suez or all of the big firms or the medium-sized firms who can come in and have a little bit more bench depth, but they don't necessarily know the facility as well as the city's staff. So there's a trade-off there. You have to find that right combination of that institutional knowledge so that you're doing the best you can for that particular utility.
Thank you for that. That's fantastic. Sort of, you know, playing off those questions, where would you say the trend has gone in the past years? Do you see a trend in the municipal world moving towards using more public-private models in order to deliver their wastewater? And is this a trend that that we're going to see continuing to grow, or is it something that you know, there's changes that need to be addressed before we can, you know, fully move forward? What are the big hurdles for us to, you know, move forward into these public-private partnership type deals to start, you know, fixing and mitigating that gap in the public infrastructure when it comes to wastewater?
Well, from our side, yeah, I think a lot more seriousness being taken to the budgets, the long-term planning, the sustainability. This is a big movement within utilities. Is sustainability, appropriate water pricing, figuring out that it's not just your day-to-day, but as we're talking about planning for the future, having a surplus that you can plan for 30-year replacement 50 years from now, you need to start doing that. So more and more communities are separating out or being required to separate their water services from their taxation and fully collect on that within their water rates. And then that's required a separate water board normally that is determining service models, service delivery. And then we're seeing these operations develop like EPCORs or going to Aqua. You know, I was a small community where I started, and we are near bankrupt. And I talked to the province about how small we were and we're not viable. And they said, well, get viable. And the only viable way was to join with others and coordinate as a regional sector our monitoring systems, our teams. We're seeing this now. A great model in Canada is the Atlantic First Nations Water and Wastewater Authority, where all the First Nations communities in Atlantic Canada are gathering together to form this corporation. And hopefully with that governance model, that they're able to really address First Nations water in Canada. But it's an exciting time to see us all focusing on the true value of water.
There are, you know, as we know, a range of opportunities, everything from your standard design, bid, build in terms of your infrastructure all the way through a P3. And that kind of applies to your contracting as well, because how you contract your O&M services, as Robert mentioned, can be a range of services. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. It can be contracted for a portion of the services or specific things, all the way up to full contract operations by one of the biggest firms again, like Veolia or like EPCOR, who actually is in Texas too now. They've just moved into Texas. And, or, you know, one of the other, Aqua doesn't come down south of the border, but they certainly have a pretty good stronghold there in northern Canada. So there's a range. Even Aqua provides different services for their contract operations. They don't do everything for everybody. So I think, Joe, you might want to speak to that a little bit.
Sure. So, and you're absolutely right, Rhonda. I think that those range depend on what the municipality's really looking for, and it's a partnership. First and foremost, I'll repeat that several times probably today. It's a partnership. When you sit down at the table and you look at the approach of what they're truly wanting, and I'm speaking about the municipality, city, town, whatever the case may be, and you sit down and you talk to them and you try to figure out what's needed, and it may be labor only. Services, contract operations, and you do labor only contract where you take over and have a partnership where the employees there fall underneath of a contract operator. That gives the flexibility for them to still have the financial control, I guess you will, of the water, wastewater assets on the ground. The only thing the only trouble that causes when you have a main break or you have something break in the plant, now that contract operator is asking for permission to fix it, and the time it takes on an emergency event to get that fixed is can be small depending on how the contract's written, all the way up to a couple of days. Now, if you go to full O&M, that's in my opinion, that's where the true savings come in for the municipality. Because at that point, whether it be Veolia or another company, that's where the buying power comes in from a large contract operator, where you can get chemicals much cheaper. You can get pumps, hydrants, piping, whatever the case may be. You can get it much cheaper than what a local municipality town could get that for. And you keep those. You not only lower the rate or lower their cost right off the bat from day one, but then you're able to sustain those costs for the life cycle of that contract. And another thing that does for whether it be city council or mayor or ratepayers in town, you're able to take that and keep their rates from continuing to climb. And I'll go back to the infrastructure piece because I know we'll talk about that in a second. That allows them to put back money for the infrastructure, and our capital projects team that we have that travel around North America and provide those capital needs for the municipalities that we serve in. That's huge, because we can take that as the owner's rep and take those capital projects and that infrastructure going in and apply our buying power to that and help lower that even more. But you're right, Rhonda and Robert, it ranges from labor only all the way down to, or all the way up, shall I say, to full contract operations. And those range between, 3 years to 30 years, depending on what the municipality wants. I won't talk too long here, but I'll say the longer the contract term, the more the contract operator can invest in the system. So, for example, if it's 1 year, if it's 3 years, there's not a lot of payback for that contract operator to come in and say, okay, I'm gonna put $500,000 into this plant because I know I'm gonna be here for the next 20 years, let's say. And I know over that 20 years I can recover my cost and put that money up front into the system. Where the municipality or whatever the case may be doesn't have to come up with that upfront money to do that. So it truly is, at the end of the day, it truly is a partnership between the contract operator and the town or city that's being served.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that. Thanks for that, Joe. I think that actually is a good segue into sort of our next batch of questions, which is dealing with the innovation and resiliency side of this. So when you're bringing in the private sector as a partner for these contracts and they get into that O&M world of, potentially 30 years, it gives an opportunity to truly flex its innovative ability. And, over at the council, this is something that we're constantly stressing about, that awesome innovative capability and capacity of the private sector to bring something to the game that could be a real game changer. So obviously with the pandemic, and this is, we've had a unusual event that's affected every system across the world. Can you speak on what the value of having that private sector entity being in there and their ability to innovate and manage events like COVID means to these systems and how it helps with their resiliency? I'll start with you on that, Joe, if you're good with that.
Sure, absolutely. So I know, looking back all the way to when COVID started, I would say back around, it started long ago, I'll say, but we started getting phone calls around April, May timeframe, even into June and further, from small cities or towns all the way up to large ones wanting assistance and people. We lost half of our staff due to COVID. Can you help? We lost our licensed operator. Can you help? And I'm talking dozens and dozens of these phone calls that rolled in through either the website or just directly to the local folks that were in a nearby city. And that's tough when you say, well, we're trying to manage that too on our own with our own staff. And there was a couple of cases where in nearby cities where we were able to do emergency services agreement in order to help. But with that said, a contract operator is also not whether it be Veolia or another company, it's also not a temporary labor firm that houses a bunch of folks sitting on the bench that's ready to go at any given moment for an emergency that comes up at a neighboring municipality. But I can say, you back up to all the water and wastewater professionals across North America and across the world that got up every single morning, regardless of what was going on in the outbreak that happened at the hospital or the deaths that they had in the family. They still got up every single morning and went to work. That I've spoke about a couple times now. That was amazing to see. But you talk about resiliency, whether it be at the wastewater plant or with in terms of people, it's huge in the market. It's huge in the within the municipalities. That's where we're going to have challenges in the future, because right now we're going to have over the next few years a lot of professionals that hold the licenses for their plants, for their state, that's going to be retiring, and trying to get into that next phase, if you will, of getting folks licenses and what they truly want, which is that ultimate digitalization across that water and wastewater plant. And that's where the infrastructure again comes in, is making sure that our SCADA is up to date, making sure that those firewalls, those protections are in place so that they can't be hacked, so that I was talking earlier about my son that loves gadgets, computers, iPhones, iPads, and Twitter, and everything else. That's where we're headed, and we're trying to keep up with that. So I'll pause there for a minute.
I've got a couple of comments to that. The pandemic has driven innovation for sure. We've had to make those changes, and the way we communicate is the biggest way we have changed in the field as well as in at the offices. We have very few people in the offices. We have our essential staff. So we have learned and are learning even every day how to better utilize these kinds of tools like GoToMeeting and Zoom and Teams and using tablets and using smartphones in the field to take your readings and do all the things you need. That has really accelerated over a lot of utilities who had not necessarily planned to do that until this pandemic happened. So that level of innovation has increased dramatically. But by the same token, with what Joe was just talking about, with the digitalization of the facilities and the systems, that means we need a higher level of staff to manage that type of digital utility, that very much higher technology. And we have not and are struggling to keep up with getting the right kind of training and the right kind of skill sets to our operations and maintenance staff to do that, to take care of these more technologically advanced facilities. That's been coming on since well before the pandemic. That's been coming on for the last 20 years. We're struggling to keep up with that. Technology is changing at a really high rising pace, and the staff we're really trying to keep those up. And this is very true, as he said, with the retirement of the old institutional knowledge of how plants used to work, and trying to get the younger generation of operators and maintenance staff who are so critical up to speed so they can run these new facilities and they can take on these responsibilities. Also ties into what we pay these people. These people are professionals and we don't really pay them like that. So that's a whole different topic we can spend a whole nother hour on, but it is a component of this whole innovation and technology issue, is realizing we need better trained staff, and better trained staff need to be paid at a rate commensurate to their training and their requirements and particularly their responsibilities. I have said a number of times, you have a $10 billion asset. You want to pay somebody $15 an hour to take care of your $10 billion asset. That seems kind of, there's a disconnect there. So there's an education component to our elected officials and our decision makers on all of this, which is a whole nother part of that communication. Robert, I'll hand that part over to you.
Well, you're saying it, Rhonda, that accelerated this workforce development that's, got to be a big movement in our sector. And it's identified reasons to move forward with a lot of these innovations. And it is exciting. And it's demonstrating, the pay levels that we're seeing in a lot of jobs, whether it was healthcare and long-term care, but water, wastewater. And these water, wastewater workers, whether they work for the municipality or they work for a private company, they're not making widgets. They care about what they do. They know that they have the lives of their community at their hand and the environment, and they do what they got to do. And the pandemic just brought all that to light as well. We've always loved to be underground, and you never see us unless there's a problem. But all of a sudden, it is the most critical service. It was more important than transit or roads or food or even hospitals. The hospitals can't work without water. And then we were telling people about, drinking their tap water is great. And, we've been telling them about flushable wipes forever, and nobody listens. But then when we tell them your house can be filled with COVID-19 poop, everybody listened. So, there were so many things that came out of that. And we had such dedicated workers that were quarantining themselves at home, or they were quarantining right on site in some locations to get through this, to make sure that they stayed healthy so that they could keep the water healthy. Yet here, in a lot of jurisdictions in Canada, they were not recognized as frontline workers for PPE, for extra support services like daycare, or for vaccination. When we were trying to get them vaccinated, we seem to be down the list underneath a lot of others. But there were benefits to, in my small community. The big cities were pretty good, but the smaller ones really had to rely on each other for help, as Joe said. When I went to the Ontario Clean Water Agency, beforehand I had two guys. One guy was also the fire chief and worked full-time at the hydro and the water plant, and another guy that rode his bike between one and the other. And if he was sick, well, maybe we just didn't check that day. So now I have Aqua, and if one guy's sick, they bring in another guy and another and another, and they had an army of people that they could splat around. On our SCADA, it was all centralized. So there were benefits to that a lot of people who hadn't gone there were suddenly, I think I got to belong to something a little bigger.
Right.
It's a fascinating topic. I think I think a lot of people realize the value of these assets and how integral they are to the day-to-day operations of society and the value that these people working in it represent to society. And I think that really drives again this need to make sure that these assets are being properly maintained and updated and are at the top of their game, which leads sort of into the next question of future-proofing these assets. We obviously know that these assets are essential. We need them operating. We've seen them manage a pretty significant pandemic. We obviously know that there'll be things that are not pandemics that will come into these assets in the future. What role do you see the private sector playing in ensuring that these assets are future-proof in the future from, let's say, climate events or another event like a pandemic?
If I can start with that, one of the things we're seeing, and certainly, although obviously I'm in the U.S., I work a significant amount in Canada, and I've been on the Water Technology Acceleration Project for the province of Ontario. I was on the board of directors for that for about 6 years. It's provincially funded, that allowed and helped small companies who are developing innovative technologies get their technologies to market. So the private sector is the one developing this innovation. They're finding these things that can work better, and they're really, and Veolia is a big supporter of companies that do that, and some of the other big O&M firms also support that. So there are opportunities. That's where the private sector is really coming in. They're developing these new technologies. It's really up to the municipalities and the industry and the sector to not put up too many roadblocks to using new technology. New technology can be scary because sometimes it hasn't necessarily been proven out really well yet. You're maybe, customer serial number 001 or 002, and people and organizations, municipal organizations, don't like to take that kind of risk, but they need to be open to these new technologies because they are being developed. And there's some great things coming up that are going to make these folks' jobs easier if we will look at them and allow to use them.
Yeah,
Go on, Joe.
no, I agree, Ron. I think that in terms of weather patterns and what we're seeing today, and how that relates to our assets, whether it be in the ground or above ground, it's a challenge trying to figure out where the next hurricane is going to be, or that cold weather event, or that flood. But the main part is being ready for it regardless of what's coming. And we use a model at all of our facilities. Our asset management group does, looking at the assets, looking at the 3D of the assets, looking at the O&M manuals, putting together the born on date of that asset all the way to the end date with the life cycle date of that. And what comes between there is important. What maintenance, preventive maintenance done, what program do you use to do the preventive maintenance? That's important. But the other thing I wanted to mention is we've all been through several hurricane events, several floods, and we had one here recently with Ida that came through Louisiana, Texas area, and during that. It's a big event. You have between 130 to 150 plus mile an hour winds coming through there, and you really learn about what just took place and how to fix it in the future for the project that's being ran. And you look at the models, you look at everything that happened, you look at the risk analysis behind it, look at the O&M manuals. And during that, we were able to bring in this. It's one of the things I was trying to get to. We were able to bring in 15 employees across North America fly them down into the location and make sure that the facility was back up and running. And that's the partnership that I like. And we mentioned that the other day on the call, Andrew, that's the partnership that's needed out there. And you see it with the electric companies too, that all come in all across North America and all come in and gather in one town, and they knock everything out and get it done. And I think that's what the contract operations teams provide to these municipalities, is they're able to bring folks from all across North America all into one central location to help that municipality out and get them back up and running very, very quickly.
If I can add one thing, Robert, really quick. The WARN system is set up originally by AWWA, and I'd like Robert to talk about this in the Canadian context, is a mutual agreement, mutual aid organization between states, provinces, municipalities, organizations that helps to do that same thing on the water, wastewater side. So, Robert?
Yeah, well, this climate change is our greatest challenge over top of everything else, while trying to deal with the aging infrastructure and maintain sustainability and affordability issues. It's the climate change that's going to finish us all off. I'll put a plug in. Hey, my brother, Stephen Haller, Dr. Stephen Haller, put a paper out yesterday. So if you Google Stephen Haller and climate change, it's a short paper about why we need to act. But, I'm sitting on roundtables at the federal level on flood risk. And there's a lot of people around the table, 100 of them, talking about what we need to do. A lot of federal people, a lot of provincial people, a lot of academics, and only me representing municipalities, really, and somebody from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. But we're the ones that are going to do it all. So we're at high levels about what's got to get done, but it's going to happen at the municipal level, and we have the closest connection to the people. And how do we replace our infrastructure while dealing with all of these climate change adaptations? And not only the adaptation, but we're part of the problem. The greatest energy consumption of every community is in its water and wastewater. And so what are we doing? We just made large comments submission before the election to the federal government on their proposed infrastructure assessment. They want to do a national infrastructure assessment. And we said, well, don't just count what's there and the expected life cycle. What else can we know about it? What optimization efforts can be made first before having to replace it? How can we prolong the life of it? How can we get the most of it? What's the energy consumption of that asset? And what are the alternatives and the potential for energy savings? How can we turn that from an energy consumption into an energy producer? We're looking at all these things that are possible in that assessment. So we've been making a lot of comments there. And then there's a lot of focus on natural infrastructure. How, other than, it's all concrete and build and engineering, that there are natural infrastructure systems that we can incorporate into our long-term planning to be more resilient. And we're talking about these WARN, how are we adapting and changing, and these storms are coming greater all the time. There's no 100-year storm, 50-year, that term's meaningless. We need a new paradigm, a new scale, like it's a 1 or 2 or a hauler. We'll call it the hauler scale, and that storm's a hauler scale. I'm working on this idea, but those things, and we have introduced the WARN program. I know it works well in Alberta. We're trying to do that in parts of Ontario. It needs a lot of effort, similar to fire departments that have reciprocal agreements, and similar to what they're doing with the Atlantic First Nations. They're going to work on a large reciprocal arrangement. But the role of the private sector in this, this is why I should have concerns. And I know this is all about P3s, but I spent my whole career in small to medium-sized communities to which P3s were inaccessible. If your project was not $100 million, you couldn't even knock on the door. They'd laugh at you. Now, there are so many benefits to a P3 with long-range planning, scheduled maintenance, all this sustainability. How do I get those benefits and make them available for the small to medium communities? With thousands of communities and water systems in Canada. We can name 100 or 200 of the big ones. That's easy. But all the other ones that, you know, my community was almost bankrupted trying to build an $18 million plant. So how do we do that? So then we saw this great Canadian infrastructure bank, and we're still waiting to see what that's going to offer that's different than P3s, or is it still only at that 100 million plus level? What's there for the smaller communities to support us? And Joe probably has some stuff he can tell us on that one. But that's been a concern as to how we get those fundings available. And then what we're trying to push the federal government, maybe this infrastructure bank, to be an innovation insurance. So I tell all my members that it's not an infrastructure fund, that the federal infrastructure budget is not infrastructure budget, it's a climate change budget and innovation. So you got to put your infrastructure project in the terms of climate change and hopefully use new Canadian innovation. But nobody wants to be a guinea pig, and rightly so, with public monies, and we're dealing with lives. No municipal person wants to put their community at risk, either financially or health-wise. So there's a natural shyness to adopting these new innovations that have to be adopted. So maybe this infrastructure bank could be an infrastructure innovation insurance. So if my town wants to invest and try this new innovation, we're in. But what if it fails? Well, we can't, we're screwed. So, who's got my back? Has somebody got my back at the federal level that's going to support? If they've approved the innovation, it's a Canadian innovation company, and they've got the federal approval, and I'm going to give you my community. Who's got my back?
That's fair. That's a, you know, it's obviously a,
Somebody's got a microphone on.
Yeah.
that's obviously you know, a pretty significant topic, right? Because we're dealing with this issue of these projects that, you know, have a substantial impact on the environment in the fight on climate change, and you know, there needs to be that business case for the private sector to get involved. Certainly on the idea of, you know, an $18 million plant isn't exactly what they'll come in for. What are the thoughts on the bundling? Bundling is a common tool used in the P3 industry to hit that threshold that gets them involved. Do you see, what are the big hurdles to starting to bundle these projects so that we can start seeing P3s being used for these sort of projects across Canada?
The issue I have with bundling is that sometimes to get a bundle, you'll do things you don't need to do. You'll add things to it to get the bundle big enough so that it's in the threshold range of the dollar numbers. And in fact, you didn't need to replace that equipment or do that. And so you end up, sometimes if you're not careful, the bundling costs more than it should. So that's not to say every time, but that's a danger with bundling. It doesn't mean I don't like bundling. There are times when it's necessary, but that is a concern.
And Andrew, I want to tag in a little bit. I'll comment on a little bit on the last question, but I think we see municipalities or towns, and they vary anywhere between on their assets between an Excel spreadsheet that's being created and kept at the plant by an operator on the maintenance activities done for the month, let's say, or for the quarter. And you look at it and not everything's on there that needs maintenance. And then you go out to another municipality that's elevated themselves and they're asking about GIS, and that they have everything in the ground from all their assets. They know where their main breaks were at, the date of the main break, and they've elevated themselves to a whole nother level. And if you look at those municipalities on the second term I just talked about, they're putting money where the money needs to go, because they know where their cash is going. They know where their main breaks are. They know where their assets are. They know where they're born on date. They know that it's beyond its useful life, and they're putting money towards good use. But then you go to the smaller towns or medium-sized municipalities that don't have that same level of operations, if you will. They're putting money towards emergency repairs, constant money towards emergency repairs. When if they had that better system of their assets, if you will, or had a contract operations firm in there giving them that information, that money is not going to waste. It's supposed to be a candid conversation, so I'm going to throw that out there.
I agree. What I would ask is, and maybe Robert has more info on this, is could we develop as a part of this infrastructure funding, again, the for lack of a better term, education for these smaller, focused education for smaller utilities, to teach them how to better capture that information, to figure out what the issues are, and therefore be able to focus make that turnover from emergency repairs to preventive maintenance. Is there an opportunity in this whole new infrastructure platform that we're looking at for Canada with the infrastructure bank to maybe do some of that kind of small community training?
Well, twice we've done a national report card, an infrastructure report card that was done with the Construction Association and the FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. We were advisors. And the biggest obstacle was how many communities just couldn't do the survey. You know, we did this report card and asked everybody to fill out the survey, and most of them just couldn't do it. And we did it again, and it was better, but still not there. Now, under this current government, they put a lot of money through the FCM into asset management training, and they are getting communities there. I remember going to sessions before and asking how to do this, and people say, well, you just second 20 of your staff for 3 years, and it's like, well, I don't have 20 staff even.
Right.
So, and one of the things we discussed, so there are people getting at it, and I hate to be you give me something and I complain. Maybe it's not enough and it's not coming out fast enough, some of this asset management money. And maybe a lot of us need to see something off the shelf. I can buy a module, I can buy the program, a template, and that I don't have to go to a different, everyone goes to a different consulting group who seems to invent the wheel, and I got to pay for the full invention of the wheel when there could be an asset management program that I'm given and really simple, and it's supported by the provincial level or the federal level to get that asset management done. And I think if we go ahead with this national assessment, and we identified this to the federal government, the biggest challenge is getting the asset information. So, yeah, I think that's got to be tackled, and in a bigger way than it already is, even though, that was a huge step forward, and the FCM taking leadership on asset management training has been really important for a lot of us, but it's got to be more.
Yeah, that's certainly something we recognize at the council as well, that, understanding the process and, certainly from the P3 side of things, we're very much dealing with, understanding the benefits of a P3, but also the complexities of a P3. And you need to understand those in order for, it to work properly. If you don't know what you're dealing with to start, it's not going to be successful down the line. Just one more, we'll just do one more quick question before we hit our 2 o'clock time. On the innovation that we've seen with COVID tracking in wastewater. Can we just do a quick round around the screen? I guess I wanted to say around the table. We'll go around the screen. We've seen this interesting science story come out of COVID that we can use wastewater to track COVID-19 rates in communities or even drug reuse. What do you think of operators playing a role in this? Do you think operators are open to this kind of research? Is this a new frontier of wastewater, or is it a bit too elaborate of a technology to be seen being rolled out across municipalities?
Well, we have some agencies are already doing this. The more sophisticated agencies that have the capability of taking these kinds of tests and getting them measured is is already happening, because we have tested wastewater for a number of things for years, a number of different, bad actors, whether it's cholera, dysentery, typhoid, COVID, cryptosporidia. We do tests for all that already. So adding one more parameter like COVID is not that big a deal for some utilities. But again, going back to the smaller utilities, which is, you may have 5,000 utilities, but 100 of them are able to do this because the 4,900 are smaller and don't have that capability. So maybe that 100 covers 50% of your population, but the other 50% we don't really have a way to do that. So it really is, I think, a challenge for the smaller utilities to do something this kind of testing. So I would like to see it. I'd sure like to see it become more available to these smaller utilities. Maybe the technology for the actual test can be a little more simplified. I don't know exactly what it takes, but
yeah, we got into this.
Something to look at.
Yeah, we got into this before COVID. It's
Right.
it's dangerous shit we deal with. It's dangerous,
Right.
and it's always been dangerous before COVID. And we have to be careful, and PPE and methods that we use, and our operators have to stay safe. When the federal government was going to legalize marijuana, they wanted to know what the effect would be, and the best way was we did studies for a while before it was legalized and tested for marijuana, methamphetamines, and cocaine, and then we tested a year later, and we found out some stuff, and we could tell communities. So what's the purpose? Well, it informs either your health unit as to what drugs are concerned in your community. If you've been doing a campaign, has it worked or not worked? It alerts your police force if something is on the rise or not on the rise. Maybe they need to know. So, and all I've said is, yeah, it's possible, but it's not our interest. It doesn't. We're not looking for more things to do. It really doesn't affect my operations. So if the health unit wants this information, the health unit, I say, can come and get it, and they can train someone who's qualified to come and get it, and we can get them access to it. But we don't have costs. We don't have the money. We're already hurting. Then to start investing in this that has nothing to do with our operations. If this is a public health issue, public health, come and get it.
No, I agree, Robert. I think that, and Rhonda, it all depends on what you want to do with the sample you take. As an operator, they want to know what samples do I need to take and what it does, and how do I analyze it? What's the data mean to me in terms of operating the facility? Now, if it's a COVID test that they're sample that they're trying to take, they got to send that to an outside lab. To figure out who to send it to, where to send it, and how much it costs. Does it need to be overnighted? What's the hold time on it? There's a lot of things that they got to figure out before they ship the sample. And at the end of the day, that sample that they just took and sent out has no effect on their wastewater plant at all. They're more interested in their IPP program and how that's affecting their plant. Who sent more BOD last week than they should have? And where are they at? What industry did that to me? Because now I'm having to spend the weekend working the plant. So yeah, that's really where their focus is at. Now, does the COVID test help the municipality say, I have 60% of the population that's asymptomatic? Maybe. That may be, but I agree with Robert. That's really a health department decision and call whether or not those samples need to be taken.
And since I have not seen, have you guys seen any evidence that the COVID is transmitted through drinking water? It's not, because of the disinfection of our drinking water systems. Then it really, as Joe says, it doesn't benefit our operators to spend more time taking tests that they're already treating for, basically. They're already taking care of this particular organism with what we already do. So taking more tests to prove that costs money, and somebody else should do it, public health agency.
That's some great perspective. Thank you very much to our speakers. That is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank you, Robert, Rhonda, Joe, for coming out for this, and thank Wes Muir for putting this together. That's all the time we have today.
I love to talk about poop. Anytime you want to talk poop.
Excellent. For those who are interested in learning more, there is a Veolia sponsored session, like I mentioned, at our conference in November, along with a bunch of other great content, and we're going to look to bring more stuff on the municipal wastewater topic in the future. So stay tuned for that. Until then, we'll be back with a candid conversation in December. We're going to be taking November off because of our conference. So for those of you who need their fix of council content, be sure to check out our website for tickets to that conference. Thank you again to all of our speakers, and have an excellent Wednesday. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
So much.